Mark Rogers TV back with you following a week 7 of college football. The rankings came out today. Let's carve them up. Let's see where the AP and the coaches poll may have missed it. And I think there are some obvious issues here. And then I'll give you my top 10. So let's run it down first in the AP. Mississippi State, number 1. Florida State, 2. Ole Miss, 3. Baylor 4, Notre Dame 5. So those 5 teams are undefeated. So rank them as you will, and we'll give you a logical sequence of why we rated them the way we did. Auburn at 6, Bama at 7, Michigan State at 8 in the AP, Oregon 9, and Georgia 10. This is how we have it. We've got Mississippi State at number 1. A very difficult decision over Ole Miss and Florida State in particular. The reason we've got Mississippi State at number 1, Bulldogs, of course, 6-0. 3 monumental wins: LSU, Texas A&M, and Auburn. Okay, the LSU game was on the road. We know that the Tigers are possibly the worst LSU team that we've seen in the last 10 or 12 years. Still, it's LSU talent and speed. Mississippi State mostly dominated that game in Death Valley, and LSU is still loaded with athletes and talent. It's a good football team, a team that's probably going to go 8-4, something in that range. And LSU, that's still a quality win. No, not a great LSU team, but a very quality win. Then they beat Texas A&M, who we all thought, wow, they whipped up on South Carolina. Texas A&M looked great the first 4 weeks of the season, and Mississippi State dominated that game too, and they beat Auburn, who many thought was the best team in college football. Mississippi State won that by 2 scores, despite turning over the ball 4 times. So Mississippi State, by far, I believe that they've got the best resume and should be number 1. I've got Ole Miss number 2 because, again, I look at the resume. The resume 6-0 and the 2 huge wins. Alabama, who may be the best team in the country, certainly shouldn't be voted number 1. They've got the loss at Ole Miss, but Mississippi won that game at home against an Alabama team that was dominant in previous wins. That was a great victory. Then the Texas A&M game was not close on the road. Ole Miss's defense looks to be possibly the best in college football. I believe Ole Miss in the number 2 spot. The reason I give Mississippi State the edge over the Rebels would be because of the one more quality win. Again, for Mississippi State, it's LSU, Texas A&M, and Auburn. And the Auburn win, I believe the Tigers are one of the top 5 teams in the country. So that win, extremely impressive. Ole Miss beating Bama and Texas A&M. For Florida State, much softer schedule. But credit the Noles in defeating Clemson. We all saw that game. Clemson probably outplayed the Noles, but FSU pulled it out with a backup quarterback. And they also won a very impressive game against an Oklahoma State team that is now standing at mid-season with just 1 loss themselves. I've got Notre Dame at 4. The reason I've got Notre Dame at 4, Baylor at 5, Notre Dame with a much more difficult schedule to date. Not saying that Baylor may not be better than Notre Dame. And, of course, the Irish play Florida State coming up this week. But Notre Dame has beaten, I know these aren't great teams, but they're at least Power 5 teams that have shown us something at different times this year. Syracuse, Michigan, Purdue, Stanford, nice win, and North Carolina. North Carolina's 2-4, 2-5 at this point, 2-4, I believe. So Notre Dame doesn't have, other than the Stanford game at home, and Stanford's still a quality team, despite the 2 losses, Notre Dame has a series of decent wins. Baylor's got nothing until they hit Texas and TCU. Their first 4 games, forget it, nothing. Okay, then the TCU win. Before that, Texas, when the defense for Baylor looked really good in that game, and they needed some help to beat TCU. But still, the best win on the board between those 2 teams, Notre Dame and Baylor, was the TCU win by Baylor. But overall depth of schedule, I give the nod to Notre Dame. Notre Dame at 4, Baylor at 5. Auburn, I believe, is the best of the 1-loss teams. And listen to this. We've got 27 1-loss teams playing FBS football. 22 of them in Power 5 conferences. We could load up the top 25 with nothing but 0 and 1-loss teams. That's how difficult this is. So the resumes are extremely difficult at this point to differentiate. But at this point, Auburn has a win against Arkansas, Kansas State on the road, and of course the win over LSU. And they've lost to the number one team in the country. So Auburn, I believe, is the best team next at 5-1. I've got Alabama at 7 at 5-1 with equality wins over West Virginia and Florida. And they also won over Arkansas. Not that impressive, but the Hogs, a much improved football team. So Alabama's got the one loss on the road against number 2 or number 3, depending on your service. My 8th pick is going to be a bit controversial. Arizona at number 8 at 5-1. The Cats have the one huge win at Oregon, and that is huge. They've got the one loss against USC. If you saw that game, the Wildcats put on a huge flurry in the fourth quarter to get back in the game, should have won it. Had they nailed the field goal, the discussion would be much different right now. We'd be talking about Arizona vying with Florida State, Notre Dame, and Baylor in the top 5. That said, hey, kicking's part of the game, but Arizona beat Oregon. So I don't like to see Oregon ranked above Arizona because they did play head-to-head, and they played at Oregon. So Arizona should get the nod at this point, I believe, over Oregon. So I've got the Cats at 8. I've got the Ducks at 9. TCU at number 10. TCU, consider the last 2 weeks. They win over Oklahoma, who's a top 15 team at this point, and TCU with a one loss at Baylor by 3 points and scoring 58 points. That's about as good a victory or loss, about as good a loss as you could possibly have. So TCU at number 10. Again, consider 27 teams with one loss, 22 in Power 5 play. So I took great consideration in teams with like Oklahoma State with a one loss against Florida State, East Carolina in defeating Virginia Tech, and let's see, North Carolina, and another good football team was mixed in there as well. East Carolina defeating 3 good football teams consecutively. Well, the other game was against South Carolina. Their one loss. Ohio State's coming on, but the Buckeyes have no real good wins at this point. Probably Maryland's their best win. A lot of people talking about Ohio State being a sleeper at this point, but I think the Buckeyes don't have nearly the resume of these other teams. It's going to come down to the Michigan State game for them. We got Kansas State, who's going to have to go through the gauntlet in the Big 12. They have yet to play the good teams in the Big 12, and they, of course, have the one respectable loss against Auburn at home. Michigan State, I don't understand necessarily the respect for the Spartans. I believe Sparty's good, but in the coaches poll, they're at 6 and Oregon at 9. Not only did Michigan State lose to Oregon by 19 points, but Michigan State also doesn't have the UCLA win under its belt. Michigan State did defeat Nebraska, a decent team, probably on the same level as UCLA, but Oregon's got the Washington State win. Oregon's got, of course, again, the UCLA rout in defeating the Bruins this last week on the road. Georgia, the reason I don't have the Bulldogs in the top 10 is I just believe that TCU has a better resume with the win over Oklahoma. That's TCU's best win over Oklahoma, Georgia's best win. They beat Clemson. That's probably the best win right now for Georgia at this point, is defeating Clemson, and the one loss looks much better for TCU on its resume in losing to Baylor, one of the top 5 teams in the country, versus Georgia losing to South Carolina at home. So that's a better loss there. We also got to consider Kentucky. Kentucky's one loss was on the road in 3 overtimes in a controversial fashion against Florida. The Cats are 5-1, and again, we consider Oklahoma and Georgia, and we'll hear from those teams on down the road. So that's our top 10 right now. Number 1's Mississippi State, 2 Ole Miss, 3 Florida State, 4 Notre Dame, 5 Baylor, 6 Auburn, 7 Alabama, 8 Arizona, 9 Oregon, and TCU at number 10. Would love to hear what you have to say. This is a difficult exercise to do. Fortunately, we've got some more football to play before we get to championship week. And let's talk about it right here on Mark Rogers TV.